WEFM, the new fresh sound.
WhatsApp us or call us at 457-9997. On now.
And we are back with you for another segment of our Activated Mornings program. But at this time, we'll be conducting an interview with Dr. Richard Byron-Cox. No stranger to WEFM, but it's the first time that we are meeting him here on Activated Mornings program. So, Dr. Byron-Cox, good morning to you.
And good morning to both of you, good morning to your audience across the globe and everyone else. I'm happy to be here. I think it's the first time I am on WEFM in a morning program. I was asking you a while ago, how old is the radio station? Incidentally, when this radio station started, myself and Dexter Rose, former ambassador Dexter Rose, were the first who started the midday program, the midday commentary.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of how old I am.
Right.
So my point is that I have been involved with WEFM from the day it was born, actually.
Okay. I'm familiar with your voice on a Sunday.
I see.
Yeah, that's the too.
Yes, it's great to be here, and thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, so we know that you are you know what? You tell us a bit about yourself, because I know that you're an author. You are you're still a diplomat, are you? You could clarify that for me?
Yeah.
Let us know a little bit about who you are.
Right. Well, basically, I'm a Vincentian. I studied law, diplomacy, international relations, and languages at university. And I came back home and worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here for a short while, about 3 years or so, 2.5 years. And then I was invited to join the United Nations, first as a lawyer, and then I managed programs for the UN in various fields. And finally, was head of its innovation and capacity building division. So I've had a long career as an international civil servant and a diplomat. And but I always loved writing. I began writing at a very young age, but nobody knew because I had no confidence, as a child. But I do recall very vividly the first time I realized that I saw the world through my own eyes, so to speak. I was 8 years old. I remember this very clearly, and I'd gone to a religious meeting in the park. In those days, we used to have these evangelical meetings, and I went there, and the preacher was boring. So I walked away from it and went down to the bottom of the park and just lay on the grass and looked up at the skies, and I saw the heavens, the stars and so on. All of a sudden, I felt very, very small, as nothing. And yet I felt very great, as if I was alone in the world, in the universe. Well, as we know it now, the multiverse, and that I owned this whole place, And that frightened me a little bit. And I thought, yeah, you've gone crazy, And so that was the first time I actually it came to me that there was something, in me. But at that same year, I remember I literally sat down and wrote the first poem I ever wrote. And I still remember it to this day. Amazing enough because I'm like 200 years old now, But if just to tell you, I'll just give you one verse of it. And I was a boy when I wrote this. I was 8 years old. It went something like this. I never really liked the night because it filled me up with fright. And there are always these things there that fill me up with so much fear. And sometimes when in my bed, I pull the sheet above my head because I'm afraid that I would see a zombie standing next to me. And I wrote that and kept it, And we had a neighbor, well, not really a neighbor, it's a teacher. And this person heard me say this and said, where did you get that from? And I said, I wrote it. And he said, what? And I said, I wrote it. And he said, child, you must not lie. you know, and well, you don't challenge, adults. So I said, well, yeah, I probably found it somewhere, I don't remember. And that did something to me. That made me keep all my writings quietly. I never told anybody. I never said anything. And then over a period of time in St. Vincent, you would know this, you'd be too young for this. But there were groups like Drags, Dynamic Rhythm and Art Group, Insularity and things like that, Roots, etc. And we did what we call rhythm poetry with drums, And in my teenage years, I began there. And I had written a poem called Data Go Down in South Africa, because at that time there was the apartheid struggle and for the freedom of Mandela and all of that sort of stuff. So the whole world, in particular the third world, was caught up in this whole thing. And so I had written many poems, but that was one of my major pieces. And a lady had come from South Africa to drum up support, in the Caribbean, and she was here and so on. One of Mandela's big people or whatever, ANC, the African National Congress. And I had gone to this thing, and all of a sudden I just heard my name over the speaker saying, I'm supposed to do this time. I was really shocked, But Drags was there, and Sully, Glenroy Sully Caesar, the Calypsonian, he was the head of Drags, I think, at the time, and Arthur Bob. And they were there, and they said, just come, don't worry. And I went and said it, and the whole place was just, mesmerized. And that time I was about 16 years old. And the lady, I think she used to have a program called Auntie Gertrude on radio. At that time it was 705, And she just came over to me and said, would you come and do one of your stories for us? And I was so stupid, Instead of me saying I have no stories, I said, how did you know I write stories? And she said, anybody who could write a poem like that must have written stories. And by that time, I had gotten into writing stories, and my first story was called The Christmas Recitation. It was a story about a girl who had gone to Guyana with her parents, who were missionaries, and got lost in the forest. And she was supposed to have done this recitation on Christmas Eve day in church, and they found her just before and so on and so on. But I'm telling you this story to say this. This was the first time I really realized that I'm able to write something that would make people listen to me. I was scared like hell. I mean, can you imagine a 16, 17-year-old boy, And I had never gone to a radio station before in my life, So I went to 705, which was the only radio station at the time in this country. And got into these studio, and they had the children on the floor, in the main studio on the floor. And I was as scared as you cannot imagine. I turned the truth, And what I did? I said, you know what? I'm not going to watch these people. I just closed my eyes and began to tell this story. And the whole place was so quiet. I opened my eyes, and there was the children like this. And then I looked across, and there was a man named Leslie Mackey. He used to be the chief engineer at Roleza, and he was doing the recording. And I looked over, and there was this man paralyzed. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, And interestingly, now this is a private little story I'm going to tell you. It's very short, but it's
private little story of the airways. Go right ahead, Dr. Cox. Go right ahead.
But a certain young woman, that time I was 17 years old or so, and I was going to the park, to watch a football match. And this young woman was coming from church, and she looked at me and she said, how did the story end? And that was Boxing Day. And I said, what? She said, how did the story end? I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? She said, the story, the Christmas recitation. Because I didn't know that they had played it, on the radio. But what they did is that they had the story one half first for Christmas Day. And they said, if you want to hear the other half, you have to listen on New Year's Day, And I said, they played it. And she said, yes. How did it end? And I said, well, So they didn't play till the end 6. She said, no. You have to wait until New Year's Day. But I want to know now. I said, well, you have to wait until New Year's Day. And by the time New Year's Day had come around, quite a number of people met me and asked me, how did it end? How did it end? You know? And so that is what drove me to write. Mm-hmm. But there are two things you need to know about artists in this country.
So, Doc, you could basically say it gets started from since you were 8 years old.
Yes, that is when my writing actually began. But there are two things about writing, about art generally. Unless you break through, like Skinny Fabulous, you know, or Beckett or something, you're going to starve.
So that how many years now?
Are you trying to get somebody?
No, since you've been writing.
Since I've been writing, no, I mean, I started writing as a child, so I've been writing for 50 years, basically.
50?
Right? Yeah. Right? But
you're trying to calculate his age?
Yeah, that's what he's trying to do. But in terms of serious writing, very serious writing, I think I would say when I went to university, and after I finished my first 2 or 3 years, I then decided I should write for the newspapers. And so I wrote for the newspapers for a long time, Searchlight and the Vincentian in particular, those two. But literature books, you know, like I do now, as I was saying, as an artist, as a writer, as a musician, unless you break through, you're going to starve. And I didn't want to starve. So I had to follow, you know, my professional career at the United Nations, where I spent 27 and a half years, you know, dealing, as I said before, with various things. But once that was over, not over, I left. I resigned from it because there's one other little piece of story I have to tell you is that years ago, I don't remember how old I was, but I was quite young. And I don't know if this is true, but legend has it that Robert Nesta Marley, Bob, when he made his very first recording, when he came off the set, he didn't say, how did I sing? Did you like it? Was it good? He didn't say anything of that sort. You know what he said? He said, I have something to say and the world will listen.
Okay.
And he's been dead from 1981 and the world is still listening. And that drove me. Probably the world don't want to hear what I have to say, but I have something to say, and I have to say it. So I think writing for me is something. Whether I want to do it or not, I have to.
You feel compelled,
yes,
pushed,
I have to
directed.
So
all right. Before we go into the publications that you have, I actually want to backtrack a little bit. Because at the age of 8, when the adults told you that you could not have possibly written that, what would you say to parents and even teachers or just general adults in terms of encouraging children to not just read more, but as well as to write? Because you could have just shut down at that point in time saying, you know what, I'm not going to go through with this. I'm not going to pursue this because, you know, persons are not going to believe me in terms of what it is that I put out there. But what advice would you give to parents and adults to encourage children? Because we see literacy in a sense slipping, right? The way language is written and the way in which communication happens as well. We see it slipping a bit, maybe not a bit, a lot. What would you say?
Well, yeah. I think there are two fundamental things here, as you have correctly placed them. But I want to deal with the second one first. I think we have a serious problem with reading. And this is not about St. Vincent. This is generally across the board. But we are talking about our country and we're talking about our children. And I don't know what generation you belong to, but I can tell you, people of my generation, we had traveled the world long before we ever left these shores. We did it through books.
Books, right.
Right? We had seen the world. The Arabian Nights and, you know, Hansel and Gretel, like all the German stories and things like that, Twist. Right? Oliver Twist. We have traveled the world, you know what I mean? Before ever leaving these shows, we had this imagination, right? And so somehow or the other, that reading created a different kind of mindset, you know, a different kind of approach and understanding of life. That's the first thing. And I think we have to find a way, you know, of getting back there, of getting our children to read. I don't know if you ever heard this expression, but it's said, and I hope your audience understand what I'm saying here. It is said that if you want to hide anything from a Black person, put it in a book. I don't know if you ever heard that expression.
I've heard it.
You know, and so and we have to get away from that. We have to somehow or the other find a way to get our children to read, because believe it or not, well, I can speak from my personal experience, right? Reading, and in the way we read Puss in Boots and all of that sort of stuff, it drove our imagination. And therefore it drove our creativity and our innovation, you know, in terms of language and literature. So that's the first thing. Now, secondly, to be honest, I think in our country now, children are much, much more encouraged than ever before. I mean, I am amazed that to see these young boys and girls go on soca stage and carry on. I would have fainted. I would have fainted. You know what I mean? If you had asked me to do that, no. I simply couldn't do it. You understand what I'm saying? Years ago, there was this young writer from some, I don't remember his name, and they had taken him to Cuba as part of the St. Vincent, you know, Cari Festa delegation or something of that sort, you know, and he was less than 10 years old, right? Now, think of that and think of me being 8, you know, and somebody who knew me in my neighborhood saying to me, look, this is nonsense, you know what I mean? So I think in terms of encouragement, no, I think we have that. I think people don't really do that anymore, try to shut children down in terms of their talent. I don't think we do that. What I think we need to do is to be able to drive them into reading, you know. I'm sure, but I don't know of your generation, but my generation and those before me, to this day, they will repeat for you poetry that they learned, you know, at a very, very early age. And they would tell you about books that they read. And believe you me, I would meet professionals who, apart from the engineering that they studied, you know, or the law that they studied, they don't know anything else. So if you want to discuss with them some fundamental literature, you know, well, okay, I don't know. When I went to high school, we did something called Green Days by the River by Michael Anthony, right? Michael Anthony is a Trinidadian writer. He wrote many books. The Games Were Coming, again, San Fernando, Cricket in the Road, and so on and so on. And let's take Green Days by the River, right? If you can find it, if you look it up, it begins this way. I heard the dogs barking, and I knew that old man Gid Harry was coming up the road. I looked out, and there he was with his 4 big Tobago dogs. Now, I don't think anybody's influenced me as a writer. I write in my own way. But what I'm trying to say to you is that because I read that, I felt that one day I could do that. One day, and it has stayed with me, you know, the profound nature that reading had on me, you know, and has allowed me to create this sort of stuff. So I think that idea of getting our children to read, really read, because I think, you know, the generation now is a 20-second span attention, you know, and beyond 20 seconds, you are lost,
right.
You know. So I think that's the problem. But in terms of encouragement and so on, no, I think our country is doing a fantastic job in relation to that.
Okay. I think one of the things, because I taught English literature and language for a short time. But one of the things that I always appreciated with literature in particular is when you had to do the critical thinking aspects of it, because everybody could interpret, let's say, a part in a passage, a pattern in a book differently, or an entire book differently, and you had to bring out different themes. And I think that is one of the challenges that I am recognizing in that. So you and I can come across the same material. The three of us can come across the same material, but each of us can interpret it differently. But many persons are not using enough brain power to try to figure out or understand things for themselves. They prefer to accept things wholesale from your opinion or Maka's opinion or my opinion, as opposed to coming up with your own thoughts and opinion. And this is, to me, why literature is so important.
No, I think that is a fantastic, a profound thing that you just said. I think it's truly profound. Why do I say this? You know, we live in a world where it seemed to me that we're encouraged to surrender the sovereignty of our minds. So the phones are smart, right? And therefore you don't have to be smart. You can be dumb because you have a smartphone in your hand, you know. And I try to say to the young people who, well, I used to teach university, I was a university professor as well. And I always say to my students, look, let the phone be smart, you be wise, you know. But what we have is a situation where everything is in my phone. So I don't have to think. I don't have to reason. Mm-hmm. And let's come to the point you're making, critical thinking, you know. But in the first place, before you get to critical, you have to start to think. You understand? Mm-hmm. Before you get to critical, you have to start to think. We're not even doing that. We're not even doing that. And that is where the danger lies, you know, because
So let's put a pin and see somebody actually calling. Put on the headphones. All right. Caller, don't start speaking yet. 1 second. 1 second. Morning and welcome. 1 second.
Oh, Jesus. My God.
Okay. It's okay. We'll deal with it after.
Yeah. Just.
All right. Caller, good morning.
Hi, good morning to the listeners, good morning to the host, and good morning to the guest, Dr. Richard Byron-Cox. How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. I just had a little catastrophe, but we're getting that fixed. Yes, sir, good morning.
All right, first let me introduce myself. We are acquaintances. This is Byron-Cox speaking.
Oh, Mr. Matthias, yes, we haven't seen each other. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm good. I'm listening you talk about your recognition and the books that you've written.
Yes.
And you mentioned a book that one of my favorites had it in a secondary school at the St. Martin Secondary School, Green Days by the River.
Michael Anthony.
You mentioned that. Mm-hmm. Yes, Michael Anthony's Green Days by the River. And when you spoke about that, and I said to myself, you know, in fact, your writing is somewhat similar to what was written by Michael Anthony. You know, it's one of the books that I kept from secondary school age.
Yes.
And the thing about the book that I liked most is that I saw myself being submerged into it and actually being Shelley, you know, falling in love with Rosalie.
Yes.
And you know, the thing about it, that the book, it speaks about Afro-Trinidadian boy trying to be in love with an Indo-Trinidadian farmer's daughter and the challenges. It was so coming to life. And I from the excerpts I've gotten from your books and from what I've read thus far, I can see the similarities there. It may be fiction, but non-fiction, I should say, in a sense, you know. But I just want to congratulate you on your efforts and looking for some signed copies pretty soon.
Okay. Firstly, yes. If I were to say that there's anybody who influenced me as a writer, it would be Michael Anthony. But I don't think I don't think that anybody really. I don't think there's anybody who I would say really influenced me. You know. But two things about that, and I think this is what I wanted to get to when you call in relation to what my interviewers are asking me, is that, you know, Oliver Twist, I'm not a white boy, you know, and I never lived in England at that time. David Copperfield, the same thing, or Hard Times, for example, or Great Expectations. I've read all of those books by Charles Dickens, you know, but in Green Days by the River, you know, I know Cocoa Tree and I know Immortals, yes. and I know Plum Rose and all of that sort of stuff.
Yes,
and you remember Mr. Good Harry when he was drinking from the river, and Shelley says to him, "But you're not afraid there's alligator in the river?" He said, "So who afraid alligator?" You know, that is how we speak. Who afraid alligator? You know, you wouldn't find that in Charles Dickens. My point is this: that in West Indian literature, you know, you see yourself. Mm-hmm. You know, Green Days by the River, A Year in San Fernando, The Games Were Coming, you see you, you know, you understand this and you understand the hot sun and so on. As a matter of fact, Where Mama Stays in Vain, which is my first real, what people call my first real classic literature book. One of V.S. Naipaul's relative, you know V.S. Naipaul, the the great Trinidadian writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Well, the West Indies has created 2 Nobel Prize for Literature, the other one being Derek Walcott, right? And I had gone to Trinidad to do some work for the UN, and they mentioned that I write books and so on, so she went and looked it up and bought Our Mama Stays in Vain. And she wrote to me and said, you know, I taste the mangoes in that book. I feel the licks, you know, that Jaffat got. And I got frightened with the zombie stories and so on. In saying all of that, let me just say that next Tuesday the 31st, there will be a very special program with myself, former Ambassador Bowman, Andrea Bowman, with Professor Leonardo Garro, Dr. Cleve Scott, who you were talking about this morning. I was listening to you. Dr. Cleve Scott and Dr. Renel Murray. And there's going to be a discussion on my work as regards its importance to Vincentian history, to philosophy, to religion, and things like that, to feminism and all of that. So it's going to be a major, major exercise on the 31st. But coming back to what I'm saying, when Mama Stays in Vain, and this young woman said to me, look, I saw everything, I feel everything, you know? And that is what I try to do in my work. And that is what West Indian literature is about. It's about us, it's about who we are and what we are. I mean, the Arabian Nights and all of that, I read all of that, you know, and the German tales and so on, you know, things like, what's his name? The French writer who wrote 80 Days Around the World and all that sort of stuff.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, what's his name again now?
Let me Google.
At 80 miles under the sea. What's his name? Jules Verne's, right. Jules Verne's and all of that. Or you may have read the Count of Monte Cristo and all of that sort of stuff, right? Right? But that is not our story. The question I ask myself is this. This is the question I ask myself. Why is it that we think that, okay, European literature is important to the world, right? Arabian literature is important to the world. Chinese literature is important to the world. So everybody else's story must be told. Why not ours? But even our Caribbean, I don't know if you noticed this. Val, are you still there?
No,
right? But I don't know if you noticed this. But you said, Madam, you said that you taught literature and English lang for a while, right?
Well, like 3 years.
All right, for 20 years. I'm sure you've never seen a book for CXC from St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Antigua, Grenada, St. Lucia. It all comes only from 4 countries. Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Nowhere else. Is it that we can't write? Is it that the smaller islands don't have a story? Is that really true? You know? And on Friday, there's going to be a launch of a history book written by Dr. Cleve Scott, Dr. Adrian Fraser, and Dr. Michael Denny, right? And there's a salient point they make in that book. The Vincentian story as regards the history of the making of the West Indies, so to speak, is never told. I don't know if you read history at secondary school, but if you read the making of the West Indies, if you read pre-emancipation and post-emancipation, very little, if anything, is said about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You understand? And so the point is this, isn't it? Is it that we do not have intellects? Is it that we don't have an intellectual legacy of our own? Is that all true? I beg to differ. You understand what I'm saying? So one of the things I think of my life as a writer, and this is the most important thing to me, is to set an example. This comes back to your original question, right? So that children who are listening to me, are seeing me now, you know, hearing me now, would say, well, he wrote it, I can do that too, you know? And I'll tell you a secret. There is a teacher, a lecturer of literature in Barbados. One of my books, I think it's the story of Pauline Bramble. She wrote the preface to that book. She wrote the preface to that book. Listen to this story. I called Ambassador Bowman. At that time, she was the ambassador in Taiwan. Andrea Bowman, Mrs. Bowman. So I called Andrea Bowman and I said, listen, I am looking for somebody to write the preface to this book. Because to be honest with you, my other books, I didn't set out to write a classic. The one book I set out to write a classic from day one. You know, I set out to write a classic. And let me backtrack a little bit before I go into that. When I wrote Where Mama Stays in Vain, the late Ken Boy, the businessman, was my friend. And I went to
You
Ken.
have it there?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so you probably hold it up in front of the camera.
Right. So, yes. Just give me a second. Right. So this here is Where Mama Stays in Vain. And all of my books are available at Games Bookshop and at Korea City store in the center of town. When I wrote this book, and there is, you can find it if you want, I'll give it to you, and you can open it. And you would see at the front of this book, there are comments from around the world. Find the one by Ken Boy. Just open it and you would see comments.
You can get them online as well, right?
You can get them on Amazon. However, I just want to tell you this little story that when I wrote Where Mama Stays in Vain, and Ken was my friend, and I said to him, look, I've written this book and I want you to sell it for me. Right?
To read it?
You can read Ken's comment.
All right. So I read it all in one go. It's a story that took me back to Byron Hill. Very interesting indeed.
And that's Ken Boy. And that's a businessman, right? And Ken said, Richard, I don't sell anything unless it's good. I only sell the best. So send me the book. And I sent it to Ken. I sent it to him on a Friday. And Monday morning when I got into my office, there was this email from Ken with just those words. And at the bottom of it says, send them, I will sell them. And so one Saturday, I went down to his store to do a book signing. And I heard, while I was signing the book, because there was a long line of people who had bought this book, you know? And I heard someone say, what's happening here? What's happening here? And somebody said, oh, Byron-Cox is here signing his book. You say, he's here. And I heard this voice over in front of me saying, you Byron-Cox? I said, yes. Why? He said, what are you to Ada? I said, she's my mother. He said, oh, I see where the genius comes from. But this is a stroke of genius. It will never happen again. You will never write another book like this. Okay? And so I just looked at him and I said, excuse me, you know the book, but you don't know the author. And that made me determine that this book, The Story of Pauline Bramble, was going to be a masterpiece. Okay, so I was determined to do that.
You can hold that one up as well so persons can see that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
So,
and there's a little bit, so I do have another question for you, but after we've concluded this part, right. So this book, there's a special recognition with regards to this. So let us know what is so extra special about this one.
Well, what happened is that when I wrote this, I determined that I was going to write a masterpiece for this book. And this book was going to be a masterpiece. And then just give me a second to finish what I wanted to tell you about this young woman.
Okay. Oh,
right?
Okay.
This Dr. Howard is her name.
Oh.
Jacinth Howard. So Ambassador Bowman said to me, look, I recommend that you get Jacinth Howard to do it. I didn't know who she was. So I wrote to her and so on. And she came back to me and she said, Dr. Byron-Cox, it's an honor. You know, I was a 9-year-old or 10-year-old. No, I was a girl at the girls' high school, I think she said, when Mama Stays came out. And I saw my mother reading it. And she read it a second time. And I said, what's this? And she gave it to me. And from that day, I determined I was going to study literature. Can you imagine that? And now she has a PhD in literature. And she teaches at the University of the West Indies in Cape Town. That's a remarkable story. So let's get to this book. So what happened is that I'm at home and I get a note from the writers, the Artists, Writers and Producers Association. And in that note says, we hereby inform you that you have been awarded Author of the Year. And I'm like, what? Okay. Now my youngest sister, her name is Heather, right? I was so shocked. I was dumb. I didn't know what to say. So I sent it to Heather. I sent the note to Heather and said, Heads, look at this. And then she comes back to me. She said, Richie, it's Author of the Year and Book of the Year. It's then I read it over and realized it's just not Author of the Year, but Book of the Year. because I was so shocked with the author of the year that I didn't read the whole note. I just sent it to her, my sister Heather. And she said, book of the year. And I said, but my God. And then I was advised, and I think it was last Monday, not this Monday, the Monday before, is when they had this ceremony at UWE and so on. And I was officially...
It's author and book of the year for 2025?
Yeah, for 2025.
Okay.
So I had author of the year and book of the year. Now, this book is special, I think, for many people because it covers the period from 1800 right up to 1941. 1800 is just before the ban of the slave trade. The slave trade was banned in 1807, right? And 31 years later, in 1838, is when Black people were freed, okay? So it covers from that period right up to 1941. 1941 deals with what? That's when the Second World War began, okay? 6 years before that, in 1935, you had the riots. I don't know if you know of these riots, right? But you had the riots here.
1935 riots?
Yes, the 1935 riots. Okay, that happened 6 years before 1941. So it covers that entire period. And it details so much. I mean, you read it and when you're too young, you're too young, but I'm going to tell you a story. I hope Ambassador Bowman is not listening because
somebody's going to tell her.
I got myself in trouble with Ambassador Bowman, to be honest with you, because, well, not with Ambassador Bowman, but with a niece of hers or something like that. But there's a character in my book, and I sent this book to Ambassador Bowman, and she was like, look, whoever publishes your book, it must not change in any way, shape, or form. Do not compromise on this. This is true West Indies, this is true Vincentian stuff. But then she told me the character I was writing about is her uncle. I said, Lord have mercy. So I had to go back now and change that slightly. But that is not the worst thing. I then, Miss Jean Johnny Finley?
Yeah.
She runs, Perez. Now, Miss Jean Johnny Finley, she read Where Mama Stays in Vain. And I think she must have read it. You can ask her about 5 or 6 times. And every time she reads it, she finds something else. So when I wrote this book, the story of Pauline Bramble, I sent the first 15 pages down and said, Miss Finley, I'd like you to tell me anything about this. And she come back, Dr. Byron-Cox, you're talking about my uncle. And
okay.
and
so that's 2 persons telling you the same thing.
You're talking about my uncle. That is my uncle. You're talking about such and such. That is my uncle. I couldn't believe it, And the thing is that for everybody of that period or who knows something about that period, because none of us were born then, but who understand that period, you see these characters walking in front of you in Kingston. You don't know this. In Kingston, I'm going to tell you something very unpleasant, but we had what were called tenement yards. And there were many tenement yards in Kingston. You know what's a tenement yard? Well, then find out that that's your homework, right? But in Kingston, there was no central sewage system. Do you know that?
Okay,
right,
didn't know that.
Yes, the central sewage system, they started building that in the early 70s, about 1971. So everybody you had, and for those who can't handle this, you can cork your ears for 2 seconds. But what happened is that you used to have a toilet seat, and you had a bucket, and you did what you did in that bucket, and then somebody took it out to the sea and washed it out and put it back there.
Okay.
And that's a fact.
Take it out to the sea.
Yes. You see where you have the financial complex. All of that was seawater,
I remember hearing
all of that was seawater. The sea used to come right up to Back Street.
Police station.
And when you see there's a high tide, it would come over onto the street. Do you know that? So all of that is covered in this book. So what you see is a picture of St. Vincent and the Caribbean, in human terms, not in statistical terms, in human terms, between 1800 and 1941.
I want to ask you a question. How many books have you written so far?
In terms of literature books, I've written 3 major books, all 3 of them, which I have
I
here.
think the third one you didn't show to the
Yes.
camera, right?
The third one, I would crave your indulgence of both of you to read 2 very small things, because I think they address both of you as well and the whole nation.
This is the one with the philosophy?
Yes, this is the
okay.
philosophical book. It's
Okay.
called Living in Wisdom, an Examination of Human Nature.
Okay.
Right? And this is my most profound work in terms of my thoughts, because as I said, I located in my mind myself in the university of my thoughts when I was 8 years old. That's when I really realized that there was something else in me, something that I saw the world differently, But when you grow up in a society as small as this one, and where people's first thing is not so much to understand you or encourage you or whatever, but to sort of be suspect of you, critical and so on, and being who I am, being who I was at the time, it was truly difficult to ever make a breakthrough into writing. And then, as I've said before, and any artist will tell you that here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if you don't break through, you're going to starve. So I was talking to Father Mark. You know Father Mark?
Yes.
Right. I'm Mark the Silver. And he said to me, he said, Richard, I have one complaint with you. I was at his house, we were talking. And I said, what is it, Father Mark? Because I love him, I respect him. He's, he's a wonderful human being. And he said, you need to be more prolific. You have so much to write. I said, Father Mark, you wanted me to starve or what? I had to choose between either I eat or I write books. You understand? Right? Because as an artist, as a writer in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you're going to starve unless you break through, which I have not done. So, but yes,
it must be somebody, right?
Yes.
Who will you say inspire you in writing?
It's a very, very, very good question. I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you read Green Days by the River, but Green Days by the River is a beautiful book. And in terms of writing, I think there are writers who I love greatly. I love Shakespeare. He was a brilliant writer. I think Dickens is probably the best writer of prose I have read. There's an American writer called Ernest Hemingway. Right, he wrote books like The Spanish Civil War, The Old Man and the Sea, and all of that. Right, and he wrote very simply. Okay, but above all people, I think Michael Anthony. If I were to say that, but I don't think anybody really influenced me as a writer. I really don't. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't really say that. If you look at my style of writing, there is no writer that you can look at and say, I write like this person. None. Right? I think there's an internal compulsion for me to write. It's not that I want to do it. It's just that I have to do it.
How will you rate the opposition leader?
How will I do what?
Rate him in terms of writing.
Ralph?
Yeah.
Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez?
Yeah.
As a political and historical writer, he's the best that St. Vincent has, and by far. You understand? But he does not write works of the creative imagination. He writes historical works, political works. My work, a work of the creative imagination. I mean, my literature work, to be honest with you, it's only the characters who are fictional. The story is very, very rare.
All right. That's what I was going to ask you. How much, so especially this story of Pauline Bramble, how much of it is influence? So it's influence based on history, but is it more fiction than fact?
No, it is more fact than fiction.
More fact than fiction. Okay.
Yeah, it's more fact than fiction. Actually, I in this book, I describe many things which are extremely real and which happened. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the riot of 1935. But I don't call it that. You just have to read it and you'll see.
Okay.
I describe estate life, and the Orange Hill estate and so on, and how the people live there in desperate poverty. All of that is there, but I don't name the place, Orange Hill. Do you know that in the early 20th century, right? You can take a bus, from Kingston to anywhere like Coleshill and those places, So you know how people travel? By boat. And in the early years by rowboat. They weren't even sailboats. Believe it or not. So you came from Chateaubriand, not in a car or in a bus. You either came by donkey, a donkey cart, or you took the boat. And it just stopped from port to port to port to port. All of that is covered here.
Okay.
You understand? All of that is covered here. What happened? Have you ever heard of Mr. Prescott's shop? Do you know who is Mr. Prescott?
Across Paul's Avenue area?
No.
Up this street?
Middle Street.
Right, okay.
And this man had 1 million things in his store. 1 million. But you went in there and you asked him for anything and he would just get up and go exactly where it was and give it to you. So I have him in this book. I call him Mr. Million.
Okay.
But these are real characters.
Okay.
They are real people. So I think that is what made the Artists, Writers, and Producers Association call this the Book of the Year, because what I am telling.
And this is a Caribbean award?
No, it's here in St. Vincent.
Vincentian, okay.
It's St. Vincent,
okay.
Right? I think what happened here is that I tell our history, but not in statistical terms, but in the life of our people, what the struggle was, what the pain was, what the suffering was, If you read The Making of the West Indies or you read Pre-Emancipation or something like that, it tells you that, Byron-Cox was a slave master. He had 10 slaves,
such and such
25.
right.
It's all statistics.
Okay.
You understand? But what really happened to
you're doing
those slaves?
Story format,
Yes.
right? Okay.
What happened to those slaves? How did they feed their children? How did they live? What clothing did they wear? Do you know? Do you know this? Do you understand this? Why is it that in St. Vincent, for example, they used to have an expression, coconut is session? What does it mean?
Coconut what?
Coconut is session.
Is session?
Session. SESSION. What does it mean? You see?
Never heard of that in my life.
There we go. But I'm sure you heard words like kunumuno. You know what's a kunumuno?
Yeah, we use that kind of regularly on certain persons. Yeah.
Right? And all of that.
But what does that mean, though? Educate those who might not know. The coconuts is session. What does that mean?
Well, actually, you had at one point in time, coconut was a very important product in St. Vincent. This society of ours was largely, until very recent times, always a monocrop society. So at one time it was sugar, another time it was cotton, another time it was bananas, and so on. And throughout that, coconut always played an important part. So, for example, like in Mountwin, right, you got a coconut estate down there. And because coconut was used to make oil, as you might know, right, feed, as you might know, and soap, as you might know, right? You see that airport out at Annesvale, right? Before we built the AIA, right? Anytime you went there, you see where the grape supermarket is? There used to be a coconut oil factory there. I don't know if you know this. You can ask your parents, your mommy and your daddy, and they would tell you. And the one thing I always remember, I've never forgotten this. When I left this country to go to university, I was a very young man, and I got onto the plane. I said to myself, this is a very funny thing to say, but it's true. I said, if I'm to die before I return to this place, let me die with the smell of this place surrounding me. Because anytime you went to that airport, you smell the coconut oil.
Okay.
It was always there. Ask anybody. Ask your mommy when you go home. Ask your daddy.
Okay.
And so coconut was so important that if you stole it, it was a serious offense. So the case was not necessarily heard in the magistrate court, but in the high court. You understand? Because it was seen as a serious crime. And that's why so when they say coconut is session. It means it take you to court if you stole it. You understand?
I
you
learned
could be
something
locked up. You could
new
be locked
today.
up and jail for it. That is
Coconut
what it
is
meant.
session.
Coconut
Okay.
is session.
Okay.
You understand? So all of that,
Okay.
all of that is in this book, the story of Pauline Bramble. You know. So what happened is that quite a few writers, for example, Nigel Harris in Canada, who's a Vincentian writer, and he said to me, what I love about is how you cover this whole village life, you know, everything from bakes to, you know, all of that sort of stuff, you know, how you cover all of that, how the river was important to our life, because now all of us have, you put
Washing
on your,
machines,
you put your
indoor
washing
plumbing.
machine. These things didn't exist. You went to the river and you bathed in the river and you wash your clothes in the river and so on. So what I think has happened to the people who judge, who did the adjudication on this issue, is that I captured something that is almost lost to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but we might still save it. In other words, what I capture is how a community was built, how a society was built, how a people was formed out of slavery, colonialism, to independence, and to the birth of a nation, as we see it unfold.
And it's still classified as history, you know, because somebody like me reading certain things now, like how you just use that expression. I never heard it before. That is something that was said in history. 50 years from now, the children of today, looking back on it, they're going to see how persons lived back then. So it is still history, right? So, but we do have to wrap up this morning's session. But I need to ask a very quick question. You made mention of the listings of books for CXC, and you said that only 4 countries are generally featured on that reading list.
Yes.
How are books made onto the list? How do they make it onto the list? So let's say your book. How can your book make it onto the reading list?
Well, I did not know about this until it's because of Ambassador Bowman, who taught me this. And what she said was this. Well, when I wrote When Mama Stays in Vain, you know, I had called her sister. I had written to her sister, Claire Kieser, who was an editor of the Searchlight newspaper, and I said, Claire, I've written this book. I'd like you to read it for me and tell me what you think. And she said, Richard, I am not the one in it. It's Andrea, because I did not know that Mrs. Bowman had her master's degree in classical and historical literature. I didn't know this. And she said, no. It's Andrea who is the one to do this. And I said, okay. So I wrote to Mrs. Bowman and she said, I'm sorry, but I can't do it. I'm busy, It's okay. But I was determined that whatever happens now, my next book, which is this classic, she was going to read it, you know. So before I wrote one line of this book, I wrote to Miss Bowman and I said, listen, I want you to read a book for me. I hadn't written a line yet, you know, because my books are written here first. All I have to do is put them down on paper. I write them in my head. And then I put them down on paper. And so, and then she came and she said, Dr. Byron-Cox, I am sorry to tell you, but I haven't even read When Mama Stays yet. I have it there. And I said, my ego has never been so crushed in my life. I just don't believe this. And I don't think I'll ever recover from this, you know? And she said, I promise. And she read the first story. And if she's listening, she will testify to this. And then she wrote a note to me, and she said, the first story in When Mama Stays in Vain is called The Dead Man Living With Us. And she's the only person to this day who has worked out what I'm writing about. Everybody loved it. It's a beautiful story, but she'd worked it out. And then she wrote this to me. She said, you know, when I'm finished reading it, Richard, she calls me professor. So professor, I made sure every window was locked, every door was locked. You know,
you frightened her that much?
Yes, I had the fear without any horror. Okay, so and then she read the second story, and then she read the third story, and she said, "I owe you an apology. I really should have read this book when you asked me to, you know." But then I published a couple of her reviews, you know, on Facebook. And a teacher at the girls' high school, where she was the head teacher, wrote to me and said, I just read your book and it should be on CXC. I said, oh, you know. And I said this to Miss Bowman, and she said, you know, that's the first thing after I read the third story. I said, this book belongs on the sexy list, and I wish I was still St. Vincent's representative. So it works like this, that there is a committee for CXC, and you have these teachers of literature who sit on it, and they recommend the books, you know. And she sat there for St. Vincent for 10 years. But then she left because she became ambassador and all that sort of stuff. So that's how it works. And the government here has a role to play, the Ministry of Education, in recommending what books get there, right? So that's how it works.
That's how it works.
I had written to CXC myself. I sent them copies of my book and so on. They said they will get back to me. They have been getting back to me for 4 years. Nobody has answered me. I've written to them 5 times, and I just left it alone because I happen not to be from Jamaica. I'm from St. Vincent. But before I go, if you allow, I have 2 little things I want to read. They're very, very short. They're not going to take us a minute. This is my latest book. It is called Living in Wisdom, an examination of human nature. And it is, most people say it's my most profound work, not my best work, my most profound work. It is really a series of my philosophical understanding of life. The first real book I wanted to write was a book on my life. I can't because it's too hard. And secondly, I wanted to write a philosophy for Black people. I was halfway through it and I gave it up. I might go back to it because of one simple reason: people don't read. Right? And so, yeah. So this is a philosophical book. I'm going to read 2 quotes from it. It has 11 sections, covers love, hate, faith, you know, politics, you know, courage, you know, all of that. It has 11 sections. This is from the section on courage. I want you to listen very carefully. Birth happened to you, and death will happen to you. Life is your existence between these 2 points. Will you sail or will you drift? Will life also merely happen to you? I'll read that over. Birth happened to you, and death will happen to you. Life is your existence between these 2 points. Will you sail or will you drift? Will life also merely happen to you? I want you to think about that very, very carefully. And you might argue with the second line and say, oh, that does not necessarily have to happen to me because I can kill myself. Oh, yes, it will happen to you. Whether you kill yourself or not, it will happen to you. And the final quote in this book, and this is very important. And I hope every young person listening to me would understand, including both of you. At the moment of your birth, those around you were smiling while you were crying. Live with the determination that when you die, those who knew you will be crying while you will be smiling. I'll read that over again. At the moment of your birth, those around were smiling while you were crying. Live with the determination that when you die, those who knew you will be crying and you will be smiling. I can discuss this philosophically.
Suppose I want for them to be smiling because they were happy that they knew me and I made that type of impact on their life.
You have the basic understanding. It's this. Whether you believe this or not, when you're born and you begin to cry, everybody is happy and they laugh because you're born alive. And if you don't cry, you know what they do? They hit you to make you cry, to make your lungs begin to work, and then they begin to laugh. But you're crying because you have come out of your mother's warm womb into a world that you don't understand, that you don't know, you know? So you were crying when you were born, and everybody else around you was laughing, they were smiling. But if you live your life to achieve everything that you think you want to achieve, and while doing so, you have done so much good, when you die, because you will die. None of us is coming out of this alive. None of us. We are all going to die. You will die. And when you die, you have achieved everything that you wanted to. But while doing that, you've done so much good. The world will be crying while you will be smiling.
Doc, before we go, where can folks go and buy these books?
Yes, these books can be bought
online.
They can be bought online on Amazon, but you don't have to do that. You just have to go into town at Correa's City Store or at Games in Paul's Avenue, right? And you can purchase any of these books there. And I do say, and believe you me, both of you should go and purchase these books. You would not, especially you as a former teacher of literature, you will not regret it at all.
You have an idea of the cost?
I think they range between $65 and $80. That's the range. Okay. I think the most expensive one is this one because this is a huge book. But you as a teacher of literature, I can assure you, once you begin to read, you would not put it down.
And it's something that I would relate to because it's set in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as well. So
everybody, you know, one last thing. When I wrote When Mama Stays in Vain and people read it and so on, there is a particular columnist in this country, I wouldn't call name. And I sent it to this columnist and I said, could you please read this and tell me? And the columnist read the first story and said, brilliant, but you didn't write this. Second story, same thing. Third story, same thing. Fourth story, same thing. There are 5 stories in that book. And the last story, nothing came from this columnist, nothing whatsoever. So a month after and so on. And then I arrived home and I said, what happened and so on? He said, I can't talk about this. And then this columnist confessed to the public at large in a newspaper column. At first, I thought he didn't write it. I thought he heard it from someone. But then, when I reached the last story, which is called What Mama Says in Vain, here he was telling my story, and I had never told anyone it. So how did he know it? Why am I telling you that? It's to say exactly that. You would find yourself. You'd find your mom. You would find you. You would find your uncle, aunt, but you're going to find yourself.
Okay.
I do guarantee that.
All right. So let me just read. So I could call his name. So Dexter Rose says, tell my friend Richard Cox the cheat form for him. Right. So that is one thing there from Mr. Rose.
Before you go on, Mr. Rose, let me tell you this story. And a matter of fact, you can look in these books and you would see his quotations from them, including the last one. So if anybody cheat, it's him because he has rated these books. A matter of fact, the truth is, and Dexter knows this, when I wrote the first very story I wrote for any of these books is a story called When Jeff Met Lucifer. And Dexter was then ambassador to Cuba. And I and Dexter have been very good friends for many years. So I sent it to Dexter and I said, Dex, because when I came back from university, Dex also worked as Searchlight editor for some years. And so he published a lot of my writings in Searchlight. So when I wrote this, I sent it to him. I said, Dex, what? And he said, and I said, what do you think I should publish? He said, what are you worrying about? I'm editing the work for you. He took it and started to edit it, you know? So Dex has, from day one in my literature, a matter of fact, the launch of this latest book, Living in Wisdom, Dexter was the moderator of that exercise. So I know him, don't worry.
Okay. And so Trevor, and I actually don't even know Trevor's surname, but Trevor says, tell the doc good morning. And I have just finished the story of Pauline Bramble. I know it took a long time. All right. So those are some comments they're coming on the WhatsApp. All right. So Dr. Byron-Cox, we are happy to have had this conversation with you. And of course, we are extending congratulations to you, not just for author of the year, but also book of the year. All right. And we know that your publication, you're not going to stop because I guess this is one of those situations where God gave you a talent and you cannot hold back that talent. You are going to continue to pursue it. All right. So we are going to be looking forward to many more publications coming out from you. And I am hoping to see one of your books in particular making it onto the CXC reading.
Well, we hope that too.
All right?
Just before I go, I want to thank WEFM for having me. I've never been on a morning show. I've heard you a couple of times, and it was really pleasant for both of you to have me here. Allow me to say to Vincentians, please, on Friday of this week, there's going to be a launch of the History of St. Vincent. This is not a book written by me. It's written by Dr. Cleve Scott, Dr. Adrian Fraser, and Dr. Michael Denny. And it's going to happen at UE, I think, beginning at 6 p.m. Please, this is our history. This is Vincentian history. So please come out to that exercise. It's free, of course, at UE. And on Tuesday, 31st, I will be having a major exercise where all of these people, as I mentioned, will be discussing my work from the standpoint of history, philosophy, feminism, and so on. That is also free, of course. And finally, as I said before, the books can be bought at Games Bookshop and at Caress. Thank you for having me, and have a wonderful day.
You're very welcome. Take care until.
Oh, and sorry for the accident I had.
It's okay. It's okay.
My apologies for that, but accidents do happen.
Yes, yes,
so please forgive me. I promise it will never happen again.
No, that's not something. That's not something to apologize for, Dr. Cox. That's why it's okay.
It was wonderful being here. It truly was. It truly was.
And it was a pleasure us having you as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
99.9 WEFM.